Welcome to the Brave Women at Work podcast. This is your host, Jen Pastikas. I'm so glad you're here. With the Brave Women at Work podcast, you'll get the resources and tips along with real-world stories and humor to empower and inspire you to take bolder and braver actions in your career and life. Welcome to the Brave Women at Work podcast. This is your host, Jen Pastikas. I'm so glad you're here. Well, hey everyone, how are you doing out there? So I would like to start with a quote from the article, Too Soft or Too Fierce? How to be an assertive woman at work without being stereotyped, CNA, written by Nikki Yeo in November 2024. When a woman is assertive, expresses her opinions, or asks for things to be done, it may be labeled as quote unquote too much. The woman would be seen as being too pushy or will be characterized as being aggressive or emotional. I've seen other male ex-colleagues ask for what they want directly and sometimes push particularly hard in some negotiations. It was never about being emotional. They were seen as knowing their stuff. So this, my friends, is called the double bind for women at work. And so we're expected to be feminine, warmer, more community-oriented, and collaborative in nature. Men are typically expected to be tougher, braver. You hear the word braver. There's a reason why my podcast name is called Brave Women at Work, because it's the juxtaposition between the masculine and the feminine. So tougher, braver, and more direct our men are expected to be. And these characteristics are not seen as brash or too much in male leaders. They are expected of them. So what gives? How do we navigate this minefield as a feminine leader? Well, my guest, Patty Altman, and I had an awesome conversation parsing this out. Patty has over 30 years of corporate experience and brings a wealth of knowledge, vulnerability, and fun to our conversation. So during our conversation, Patty and I chatted about how her background and the support of her parents shaped her today. It was a beautiful story she told. Examples of stereotypical male and feminine traits, how Patty flexed into her masculine traits as she needed as she rose through the corporate ranks. How you can get to a point in your career where you learn to mix your feminine and masculine traits into a special brand of personal leadership. We had fun with the meme, the giving 0 Fs. I introduced it. Patty and I just laughed about it. It was super fun. What advice Patty would give to women who are looking to lead. She also shares what clears her head and keeps her sane leading such a large team at Circana. Here is more about Patty. As president of Circana's Global Solutions, Patty leads an integrated global team that helps clients drive new growth using Circana's consumer insights, receipt panels, e-commerce, media, analytics, growth consulting, and software solutions. Patty has over 25 years of market research experience in the US and globally, including across market measurement, innovation, e-commerce tracking, brand equity, advertising testing, and custom research. She also has deep expertise in consumer insights and consumer panels, including the successful development and commercialization of receipt panels in her current and prior roles. Patty's experience spans CPG, general merchandise, food service, retail, health, financial services, and other sectors. Prior to Circana, she held leadership roles at the NPD Group, Ipsos, and IRI. She is based in Connecticut. So if Brave Women at Work has made an impact on you, please be sure to share this show and all the shows, I would love that, with a family member, a friend, or a colleague. And of course, your ratings and reviews help the show continue to gain traction and grow. I'm on a mission to get north of 100 reviews this year, so if you can do me a favor and leave a rating and review, I would so appreciate it. Also, if you haven't yet downloaded my freebies from my website, check them out at bravewomenatwork.com. I've created 3 just for you. 24 career and leadership affirmations, 5 ways to managing your imposter syndrome, and getting paid 10 negotiation tips. Each of these freebies are workbook style guides, and you can complete them on your own time. And again, they're absolutely free. So check them out at my site at bravewomenatwork.com. One last announcement. I have said this on a few podcast episodes already. I'm hosting my first ever women's leadership conference in person, in the flesh, here in the Chicago area this year in 25, called Thrive in 2025. My co-host, Hope Mueller of Climb Conferences, is my colleague, my partner, and my friend. And again, we're hosting that in my backyard in Chicagoland from June 25th through 28th of this year. You can learn more about the conference and register at thriveit25.com. Let me spell that website out for you, though. It's thrive-in25, the numbers 25.com. Again, thrive-in25.com. Okay, let's welcome Patty to the show. Well, hello, Patty. Welcome to Brave Women at Work. How are you today?
I'm good, Jen. How are you? So thrilled to be here.
Oh, absolutely. Likewise, likewise. So thank you so much for making time today. So I always start with this question because I love women's stories. So tell us, and you can tell us wherever you want to get going because this is a
Mhm.
big question, Patty. So tell us like about your background story and how you've gotten to where you are today.
It's so funny because this is always the hardest question anyone can ask, right? Because I think sometimes we're sort of driven not to talk so much about ourselves. But I actually love answering the question because it gives a chance to sort of reflect on who
Yeah.
we are and how we've grown. So I really welcome it. So I grew up in Long Island, the youngest of four in a big Italian household. And I am probably older than most of your podcasts or people you've interviewed as a woman in her late 50s. So the time was different. Like when during that time, there were usually like three different paths that families would talk about that a woman would take or a girl would take. And either you're going to be a school teacher, maybe a civil servant job because there's benefits, and
Mm-hmm.
then or maybe a mom, or maybe some combination of those three things. But I always knew for me, like those were great, noble things. And I'm a mom myself, so again, a noble thing to do. But I always wanted to do something different, and I wasn't quite sure what that was. I went to college and I started off with I was going to be a dietitian. That's going to be it. I'll be a dietitian. Well, that didn't last very long. And then I'm like, I'll do library sciences. Well, that didn't last very long. And I remember talking with the counselor, and they're like, why don't you do business? You seem to have a good head for how things happen and organize. Why don't you do business? I'm like, okay, well, that sounds good. And that stuck. I did my master's and I graduated during a recession. And I'm like, boy, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know I need to get a job. So I wound up landing a job at what was then called Nielsen Household Services, and it would be NIQ for those market research geeks out there today. But again, it was like sort of I'll get my 2 years experience, and then I'll go on to be like a brand manager or design campaigns or whatever these big things are. And this is like just a good example of sometimes life takes you to places where that is where you're meant to be. Within just a few weeks, I fell in love with market research. It was never on my radar, but I loved being able to understand why consumers did what they did and how manufacturers or retailers can help consumers make better choices or meet their need. And very quickly, I just fell in love with it. And that's where I wound up spending my 30 plus careers going to different market research companies, always sort of within that consumer space to really help and to understand what drives consumer behavior and how we can help consumers meet consumer needs. And that leads me to the role that I am at today at Circana, where I lead the consumer shopper and insight group, as well as ecom, as well as our advanced analytics group. And so really anything that touches and helps our manufacturer and retail clients understand how to better meet consumer need, that's what my team and I do. So again, it's a kind of a strange journey in terms of where I started and where I ended, but once I found it, that passion was ignited, and I just really I loved the field.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love that story. So when you were choosing your field, because so my mom was a boomer, so she is definitely older than you, Patty. And Patty, you are in good company. I've had people, women in their late 50s, in their 60s, like and beyond, right? So I've
Mm.
interviewed all the women of all the stages and the ages. So you're not the oldest person. You're right in line. But did you get pushback on that when you were choosing it? Because like when my mom is in her 70s. I'm not going to tell the age. You never tell the woman's age, right?
Mhm.
So she said, okay, it was nurse, it was, teacher, it was
Mhm.
mom, it was very like lane specific. So did you get pushback on doing the role or kind of going in the path that you went on?
So really had the benefit of having two pretty amazing parents. I always say, like, if my mother was born today, she would have been a CEO of a company rather than a bus driver. She just had like, she knew who she was. She was loud. She was really happy with just being herself. And my dad loved that, right? So when you say pushback, my mom's whole thing was make sure you can always take care of yourself. And my dad's thing was you can do anything you want to. So sure, baby, what is it you want to do? So I was
Wow.
really lucky in that field. Now, again, when you think about, I was the first one and the only one in the family to graduate from college. My siblings have all gone and done incredible things, but we all did the paths we were meant to. The pushback was minimal within the household. Now, was there pushback as I went to college and did things? Yeah, often I would always be like, should I really be doing this? Because all these other people seem so much smarter and so much more self-assured. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was pretty lucky to have an environment where I felt like I could be who I needed to be. And I really do think that that has been critical in terms of how I have led and built teams. It's just really making sure that you kind of believe in people, let people kind of figure out their way of what they want to do, and think that things all seem to come together that way.
Oh, that's so great. So let's hear it for your parents. Like, yay, your parents, right? Good, like, open parents. Which, let's be honest, like, I mean, that could be, that was probably a little rare, right? That your parents were that open and weren't like, why aren't you going to do this? Why aren't you going to do
Yeah.
this, Patty? Why aren't you going to do that? So good for them. So one of the things that we chatted about, in prep for this discussion is the idea of male and female or feminine traits. So you chose a different path. So I was just wondering if you could kind of tell me, like, did you adopt any masculine traits to survive in this field, or did you
Mhm.
find a balance right away? Because, like you may know, I've been in financial services for, I don't know, I'm embarrassed to say it's like well over 20 years. And I'm not telling anybody my age either. So, um, what I will say is I grew up on the investment side of the house and very, very male dominated. So I have shared a story, which I'll share very briefly here, but I was very proud of myself at one point because one of my male colleagues said, JP, so Jen Pastikis, I didn't even have like a name anymore. I just had a,
Yeah.
JP. Working with you is awesome because it's like working with a dude. And I,
Oh.
for the longest time, was proud of it, Patty. I was
Mhm.
proud of it because I was like, yeah, I'm like in with the boys. But then I was like, wait
Mhm.
a minute, I've lost my entire femininity. Like they don't even see me. They see me as like this male amorphous blob.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was just wondering if you could chat about like, the traits that you picked up to survive and thrive, in your career.
So I love that story because I probably can also parlay a couple of times where I've been told that too. I'm like, wow, I'm one of the boys, right? That's pretty great. And then over time, you just realize you don't have to be. So I would say there's a couple of things that I think the foundation of whether you're a male or female leader are just really critical. You need to be honest, you need to be smart, you need to be value driven. Every leader, if they do not have those three things, to be honest, would you want to follow somebody who doesn't have those three values? Probably the answer is no. So I've always felt from the start, those were things that I really gravitated towards. I always tried to be honest in how I dealt with people, try to be as smart and well read as I possibly could be. And then
Mhm.
also to make sure I always stuck by what I knew was right or wrong in terms of the values that were important to me. But then you think about these sort of feminine and masculine type of qualities. I always in the beginning was like, wow, I need to be more decisive. I need to command a room. I need to be aggressive. I need to command respect. And those are things, if you ask people, they would assign probably to more masculine type,
Mhm.
behavior. But over time, I realized what made me me, what made people want to work with me, what made people want to partner with me. And even early in my career, where, everyone's a leader no matter what level you're at or what you do. But what helped me to lean in and find that those leadership qualities was also really authentic. I was always willing to show up. Well, I shouldn't say that in the beginning I wasn't, but that willingness to be who you are, to show compassion and empathy and humility, resilience. Those are all things that combined with those things like command and respect and those value props that we spoke about earlier, um, leaning in and finding a way to express myself and who I am and how I am as a female leader is where my success suddenly started to come in, because it was that
Mm.
combination of both those things. I can tell you, Jen, early on in my career, what used to drive me crazy was when people would say I was nice. And it would just always get under my skin. Nice, but I'm
Why?
well, because I always feel like there's a difference between nice and kind, right? That old cliche.
Mm.
Like nice
Hmm.
feels agreeable. Kind feels you're a good person, you know who you are, but you're not afraid to have those tough conversations. You're
Mm.
not afraid to make those tough decisions, because kindness isn't always niceness. Kindness is doing things in a way that have empathy, that you think about the full person, you think about the full, what the entire, whole self is, but you're willing to make difficult decisions around it. And so whenever someone calls me kind, I'm like, you got it. I'm a little bit less on the being called nice. Another thing that drove me crazy early on is when everyone would tell me I was mothering, right? And I would always say, you know
Oh.
what? No. Think about it. The hardest job in the world is to be a mother. You have to make a bunch of difficult decisions. So you can say that I'm kind. You could say that I'm decisive. You could say that I can make, that I'm loyal. All those things are true too, right? But I mean, it's just a different way of thinking about it.
Oh, okay. Let's stop here. Okay, so when people would say you were nice, did you like hold like a boundary there and be like, "Hey, I'm not nice, I'm kind," or how did you address that, even though it was like making you nuts?
Well, it was something that earlier in my career, I was like, I don't know what to do with this, till I realized, you know what, and this is where, we talk about leaning into male or female traits. I probably started leaning a little bit more heavily on those masculine traits, right?
Mm.
I became a little bit more serious, more focused in terms of exactly what I was saying. Maybe I didn't start it with a compliment or end it with a compliment. And then over time, like I said, finding or being able to lean in on those things, and putting um, a lot of respect around those female traits, is where I was like, okay, we're going to evolve people from thinking I'm nice to thinking I'm kind, to thinking, I'm agreeable, to thinking I'm someone who can make decisions and do things in a way where I can have people follow me because we all know it's the good thing. It's sort of making that evolution is what was really important. And it did not come overnight, right? I also think about the Patty today versus the Patty at 26 or 27. I want everyone to like me then. Now it's like, okay, no, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. As long as we get good things done together, that's all that matters.
Yes. So I love that very much. And I have to stop also on the being the office mom or the office mother. So I interviewed a woman and I cannot recall, I have to put it in the show notes. There's a woman who wrote an amazing book, a few women talking about how we want to avoid being the office mom, because
Mhm.
that is where a lot of the administration, and no problem with my administrators out there, my admin assistants, my executive assistants, like it's a noble profession. But if you are wanting to kind of get into like C-suite, or you're wanting to get in those pinnacles and in those rooms, if you're like relegated to being like the office caretaker, people don't take you as seriously all the time.
Mhm.
And they're like delegating the office party planning to you, and they're like telling you to take care of everyone, and you're like, I'm not your mama. Like I have a
Mhm.
mama and I'm a mama of somebody else, but I'm not a mama of you.
Right.
And so I was just wondering, any feedback or any advice there on women that might be feeling like relegated to that office mom space, and maybe how they can kind of navigate away from that and be taken more seriously.
It's a hard thing to get pigeonholed into, for sure, but you absolutely can find your way out of it. It's even silly little things like I will like taking notes. Again, I feel like a lot of these things are things that have been discussed in your podcast before, but finding sort of those boundaries, right? You should not be the person who's taking the notes in the room. If there's a party planning, hey, so and so hasn't done one in a while. Find ways to naturally delegate that towards that. Raise your hand for an assignment, right? One of the things I tell on my team all the time is it's great to keep doing all these wonderful things that you're doing. I'm so proud of what everyone does on their job, but you're only going to learn from stretching. So raise your hand if there's something that you want to do that's outside of your comfort zone, or you think we should be doing. And that's what I would recommend to someone who's sort of in that space. Raise your hand to do something that's outside of that space. that your boss, your peers, whoever would find as, oh wow, someone does need to do that. That would be fantastic, but it doesn't fall into the nurturing, the party planning, the taking notes, the making sure that the office is open at a certain time so people can walk through the door, talking to so and so because they're upset. Find that stretch assignment that can help sort of bolt you out of whatever perception you've been boxed into. And it's not easy, but it's absolutely doable. And find your peer
Yes.
set, right? Who's going to advocate for you? That's really important too. Who's that person who can advocate for you as well? Because I have found in my career, I've been so lucky to have people who've said, I believe in you, and I'm going to, do what I can to make sure that your true talents are shown. And people want to help, I find. And that's the most joyous thing of what we do as well.
Yes. So there's a couple little nuggets of wisdom and goodness in there, in that number one, we always are responsible for our own trajectory. So I always, when I work with my coaching clients, they're like, but Jen, I've, gotten all of the education, I've gotten all the experience, I've worked really hard, and I'm still not being recognized. But they're putting the power in the hands of the employer. And I'm like, wait a minute, no. We're playing poker here, and the employer is there to pay you less than what you deserve. Like they're on the face of like, serving them, and you've got to serve yourself, and you got to advocate for yourself. And I'll never forget one of my mentors. He asked me to get his cup of coffee like two or three times in a row. And I was young, Patty. I was like 26, 27. And I was, like in that, that fearful stage where you want to prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I'll get his coffee. But, I'm like seething down inside. I'm like,
Yeah.
I have a degree, I have experience. Like, you're asking me to get your coffee. And then finally, I just couldn't handle it anymore. Maybe it was just, I don't know. Like, I just had to. And I was like, can you please find someone else to get your coffee?
Good for
Like,
you. Yeah.
I can't. Like, I could be that 5 minutes, I could be doing something much more, productive and profitable for you. And he stopped. But if I wouldn't have said anything, I probably would have gotten his coffee the whole 5 years I worked for him.
Good for you. What courage that took, right? Especially when you're
I
younger
was
in your
scared.
career. But what a lesson learned. Advocate for yourself. It's interesting what you said, Jen, because one of the pieces of advice I always give to anybody on my team, and it's advice that I had gotten, was no one is in control of your career except for yourself. So if you're not putting out there what your intentions are, what you want to do, and it's never like, oh, I deserve this, I need it. It's like, my intention is I want to rise up to this level. I want to do this. This is the path that I'd like to take. If you don't manage your career or manage situations like what you just described, that's the best thing you could do for yourself, is you lead yourself into where you need to be, as opposed to wait for someone to lead you there.
Hmm. And, let's say that conversation wouldn't have gone well. I always ask my clients, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Right. So let's say that particular gentleman who happened to be my mentor, and he was a wonderful person, he was like, nope. Other duties is assigned. You're going to get that cup of coffee for me as long as you work for me. Then you have valuable information about the
Mhm.
situation, and then you can make decisions where you could be
Yeah.
like, do I want to stay in this situation? Do I feel not respected by this person? Male or female. So it's all good stuff. So I love the idea of just asking so that you can get the intel you need to make smart decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's bold. And leads you confidence to do other things, right? If you can have that, I'm sure that was probably a very pivotal moment in your career
Hmm.
that you will never forget. And there have probably been thousands of pivotal moments since then, but they all sort of probably built off of that moment where you had the wherewithal to state your intentions.
Totally. So in terms of the masculine versus the feminine, was there a point, I don't know if if you can think back, was there a point where you stopped caring as much about being liked? Because I relate to that, where, even until maybe late 30s, now I'm starting to give my age away. So, like, I'm in my 40s, I'm deep in my 40s, everybody. So, so I will just say, even into my 30s, I still struggled with wanting people to like me.
Mhm.
And I don't know if there was a point where you were like, oh, well, I don't know if you remember that point or if it was just an evolution over time.
It was an evolution over time, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but it's something that really has only evolved probably in the last decade, right? And and part of that is, I mean, I also happen to like people a lot. So my whole thing is I enjoy every I seek to enjoy every interaction I have with someone. I want it to be a positive thing. But you realize over time it's really exhausting too, right? Not every interaction is going to be positive. Not everyone, like I said earlier, you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. But it really probably took me until probably my mid 40s before I was like, you know what, this doesn't, it's okay. I've accomplished and done enough in my career and in my personal life that if that person, for whatever reason, I can't win them over, as long as it's not stopping the work, as long as it's not stopping the things that need to get done, it's okay. Now, I would be lying to you if I said I didn't have moments where I'm like, why haven't I knocked it out of the park with that person? Like, why haven't I charmed them? But then I look back and I'm like, well, you know what? That's okay. It would be impossible to have 100% batting, with every person that you met. So it was an evolution. And like I said, there are still days where I still sometimes put those unrealistic expectations, but I squashed them down pretty easily. But it took time for sure.
Okay, well, I'm not going to swear on my own podcast, but I will say I think there are memes out there that once you get to that late 40s or early 50s as a
Mm-hmm.
woman, like you start giving zero Fs. There are
Mm-hmm.
like whole TED Talks
Yeah.
on this. So I encourage anyone who's getting close to that edge, like go look at the memes, go look at the TEDx talks, because I think it's a real thing, but it's also so freeing. So anyone that is earlier in their career, I want to tell you that because it's so encouraging that as you kind of like, make your way through your career, there is that phase of, I want to prove myself, I want to hustle. And of course, we're hustling in our 40s and our
Yeah.
50s, but which with age and wisdom comes this freedom where we can kind of give. We care a little less, but it actually makes us have an edge to be better leaders. Isn't that unique? Isn't that kind of interesting? I think it's ironic, even.
I would agree too. And who would ever think it until you're actually living it, that it actually has a more positive effect on you than you would ever think. Yeah, I agree. I've seen those memes too, and I find them hysterical. I also find them dead on in terms of just how I think and how I perceive things today versus in the 10 or 15 years ago.
Totally. So when this show goes live for my podcast, my pod people that are in my Facebook group, I might post a meme or two about giving zero Fs because that's a safe space to actually talk about
Totally
that. Not,
safe.
yeah, totally safe. Not in the whole LinkedIn like stratosphere, but just with my pod people, you might get a fun meme or two. Who knows?
Love
So
it.
with the masculine and the feminine, here's another edge I've seen though, is that and maybe this is just me, I don't know, but people have said to me, "Oh, you're intimidating." Or,
Mm.
"Oh, you know what, you're unapproachable." So it's interesting. I don't know if you've had that on the opposite edge. So as you're kind of navigating this dance between the masculine and the feminine, maybe you come off as too hard sometimes or too soft as others. You're trying to find that sweet spot. And I think everyone has a unique mix of like the masculine and feminine because Patty, my personality is not exactly the same as yours, vice versa. It's like not a carbon copy. But I don't know if you've had that. And if you, because I still have that periodically where people are kind of freaked out by me and leadership. And I'm like, oh man, what am I doing wrong? So any words of wisdom there
Yeah.
for me?
Uh, it is absolutely something that so I have like there's two camps. I think in most cases I'm considered pretty approachable. I think part of what I do is like I just recently was lucky enough to get another team at Circana added to my responsibility, and the very first thing I did was, even though I already have like 200 plus reporting into me, and now I wanted to make sure that
Wow.
those additional people that were coming on board felt like they knew me. So I'm in this quest now, every time I inherit a new team, that I make sure that I have um, a 15-minute, half an hour, whatever it is, touch base with everybody. Here's who I am. Here's what I think about. Let's get to know each other. That's really work to kind of remove sort of, well, your role is intimidating and you are intimidating, because I try and make as much as I can a personal connection where I can. Now, that may be the only time I talk to that person for the entire year, but at least we've made that connection and I keep it open. But my kids have told me, because they've spent their entire childhoods listening to their mom work from home and or talk about her travels and her stories. And they've told me at times, you're a little intimidating because you're just so direct on what you're saying and how you say it.
Hmm.
And I try and explain again, like there's that balance. There's that balance of, making sort of those connections with people so they can see your authentic self and that you really do want everyone to feel like they're part of a team. But then sometimes you don't have enough time. So that directness is the only thing you can go to get things done sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, it's been a little bit more of, again, because of that sort of, market research is a place where relationships are nurtured and fostered. I mean, one of the things I would say is there's people that I've known in my career for 20 plus years that we're always sort of watching out for each other, taking care of each other. So it feels a little bit maybe less intimidating to the average, employee, but at the same time, there's no way around it. Your title, what you brought to place will feel intimidating. It's how to find that way to sort of bridge it. It's not always that easy.
Yeah, so I remember, for those that don't know, like my whole history, I started obviously financial services. I started as a bank teller. And I remember being totally freaked out by like the women and men in leadership and like the glass offices in the bank. I was totally freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I am that person, I'm like, oh, I've got to really show that I'm just like a normal human. Like one
Mm-hmm.
of the like I think the most like cliched words was authenticity. I think it was in 2023. It was like, authentic, authentic, authentic. But I think there is something to that because if you just come in hard charging and you don't tell them like, hey, I have two daughters, or hey, I put my pants on one leg at a time just like you, like people can get really off put. But I think it is always going to be a dance throughout my career and probably yours too, of like trying to strike that balance of like being human, but also being in control and a leader and like moving the team as large as yours in the right direction.
I think too, there's subtle ways you can do it as well. So we spend a lot of so I have an incredible leadership team, and one of the emphasis that we placed on this was how to make people feel really valued in an environment that isn't always that easy. We're charging ahead. We're doing great big things at Circana, but but again, they're hard. So how do we make people feel connected? And before we start team meetings, which I used to have them once a quarter, that my team's like, we need to hear from you more often. So we have them once a month now, and it may sound hokey, right, Jen? But we start every meeting with everyone share your events, send a picture in. What did you do? What are you proud of? Whatever it is. And I always make sure that I contribute something because I'm part of the team too. And I
Mm.
think making yourself open to that, even as something as little as, hey, here's a picture of me and my son at Bruce Springsteen, just all those little, right? Even something as simple as that, I think sort of creates a connection, even if you can go months without talking to people. Again, I agree with you that terminology being authentic, it's cliched at this point, but it is so real and it is so critical. And there's ways that you can find it. Even with my one-on-ones, I like I said, I have a genuine interest in people. And I was speaking to someone and I had noticed something in the background. I'm like, what is that? And she went to explain to me how she was a beekeeper. And I was like, you're
Wow.
on top of everything else you do, you're a beekeeper. Like, this is fascinating. So now every time that I speak to her, it's in my head, tell me about the bees. Right. So there are ways to find those moments where even though you are the leader of the team, even though you're making tough decisions, even though you're charting some waters that could be a little rough at times, that you're still feeling, or people still feel valued because you took a moment to sort of think about. And again, it came from a genuine point of interest. But
Mm.
it's those things, I think, finding those opportunities where you can show that you're as invested in who they are as you are as the company, even if you can't be there for every event or every milestone, but trying to be part of what the team is. If you're leading a team, you have to be part of a team, and that you can't be one or the other.
Okay, so side jaunt. So did you see Bruce Springsteen this last year, or when did you see him?
Well, I've seen him many times, but I
Oh,
saw
how
him in
many? How many times have you seen him?
probably about like 20.
Good for
Um,
you.
but
Good
I
job.
always wanted to bring my kids, and like my poor kids have grown up with like Springsteen always on the radio. And then finally I was able, my son goes to school in Pittsburgh and there was a concert there. And we're watching the concert and he looks at me, he's like, now I get it. Yes,
So
my
good.
job is done. My job is done.
You're like, check. I knew I was an awesome mom, and here's a little check, check. I'm even a better mom, right?
I did it. I did it.
Okay,
So
so I got to tell you, and then we're going to get back to this. But so my daughter's first concert, because I'm a '90s kid, right? So my daughter's first concert was Pearl Jam. Come on, so good,
wow, home
yeah.
run.
And I was sitting next to someone at a meeting, and I told them that, and this person was from the South, I think from Georgia, and he's like, "That's some good momming right there." And I'll never forget that. I was like, "Yes, Pearl Jam." So I didn't get to, Patty, do a lot of the concerts when I was a teen. So I'm reliving. I'm doing a '90s concert tour. So I'm just going to tell
Good
you
for
quickly
you.
who I went to this year, and who knows next year. Maybe I'll get Bruce in if he's touring. So, I did Sarah McLachlan. Come on. I did
Oh,
Weezer. I did Smashing Pumpkins, and I did Green Day this year. Come
that's
on. So good.
amazing.
I
That is
know.
so good. All and they all sound and this is like when you talk about longevity, they all still sound great. And to me,
They
they all still
do.
sound relevant. So
They do.
that's
They do. Anyway, so yeah, we talk about authenticity, and there's, a moment of real authenticity. You love
yeah.
Bruce. I love the '90s. I'm back on track, right? I'm back
We're
onto the concert tour.
it's never too late. It is never too late.
It is never too late. So, okay, so let's talk about that though. This whole idea of authenticity. I read, and I'll put in the show notes, there was a Harvard Business Review article that I've shared with clients, coaching clients several times, that's talking about the shift in what people are looking for in executive presence. And before it was like more of that masculine. And yes, like we want that dominance, we want that control, we want someone that we can believe in and that's confident and all that. Yes, it's still there. But there's authenticity, inclusiveness, respect, managing people as whole people. I see that as very feminine, in the feminine range. And I was just wondering, I don't know, why do you think it's changing? I think the whole world is changing, period. That's a whole other podcast. But why do you think that, like, our Gen Zs, even our millennials, like they're demanding a different type of leader? So any thoughts on that?
So first of all, it's about time, right? Because all the things you just described is the kind of place that I want to work for. It's the kind of place I do work for. It's the kind of team that I want to evolve, nurture, and be part of. But honestly, again, as a mom of three, Gen Zs, I am so amazed at that generation of kids. They are fully aware of what their priorities are. They are fully aware of what makes them happy. They are more conscious of being a good person to other people, not like, hey, the pie, I want my piece of the pie. They view the pie as getting bigger, and that's a happier place. I really think it's a combination of women like ourselves coming up through the ranks and our leadership coming to fruition in terms of how we manage and how we want to be part of the leadership ecosystem. But I also think it's these young kids are just absolutely amazing in terms of knowing who they are and what their values are. I've been around long enough to see every generation come in, and they're all incredible. But I have so much in a world that can be a little dark these days. I have so much faith in the future just because of who's going to be rising next as the next series of leaders. So I think it's, like I said, a combination of women like ourselves coming to this point where we can make an influence, and we have made an influence. And then it's those kids that we raised see that, and they're going to be the next generation of leaders that are going to make us even better than what we do today. And the fact that we can be authentic and be ourselves at work, I mean, that's not something I ever thought would have happened 20 years ago.
Nope.
Occasionally, like one of the moms or dads at work will have their kid on their lap when we're working, and I'm like, no, that's okay. That's all right. It's not every day. It's okay. You need to do whatever you need to do. Let's have the conversation. I'm not too worried about it. Um, I never thought there would be a day that would happen. So I'm pretty optimistic for the future. And I would agree completely with the article and the points that you just made. But again, I think it's a combination of give ourselves a pat on the back, and also to who's coming up behind us.
Yeah, who is coming up behind us? One other thing I'm seeing as a trend, and just wanted to get your opinion on this, is that there are so many companies. It's almost like the last gasp of the masculine, a little bit like the patriarchy, just a little. So there's a lot of companies that are like, you must be back at work. clause in. And like now we've got this situation where we've got, our millennials and probably our older Gen Zers are going, I don't think so. Right. So they're like still trying to push back. I'm hoping. So here's my thought, and I love your thought. I'm hoping we get to like a happy medium, right? So like I'm pro hybrid. I don't care if you have your kid on the lap. As long as you're getting your job done, I don't really care. And I just didn't know where you land on that.
Well, I'm pro hybrid all the way. Um, Coming up early on, and I try to explain this to even my own kids, there was something really special about starting your career with an office full of people. Some of the people that I know and consider my closest friends to these days were those days early at MPD when we were like coding, things by hand. But I also think that it isn't necessary to be in the office all day, all week. I think that hybrid is exactly the balance that I'd love to see eventually. Because I do think there is something to be said about the energy that you get from working together, the learning you can get from working together. I remember right before COVID hit, I was in the office, and again, I always had just an amazing team. And there was like 4 or 5 of the younger, I call them kids or not kids, 4 or 5, mid-20s, all surrounded someone trying together to figure out how to do this code for something that we needed to do. And I remember just sitting outside of my office and watching it and thinking, that's the magic. That is what's so special. With a fully remote, we don't really see that, right? I mean, there still are ways to find opportunities to brainstorm, and everyone's doing a great job of it. But I hope there's a day where we'll see each other a little bit more in the office. But again, I'm never, to me, wherever you do your work, and if you do it well and you're contributing, that's what counts first. But I think there's something that we all might be missing a little bit by not seeing each other as often as we used to. But hybrid all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hybrid all the way. Like, let's
Yeah.
have a nice mix of both. Like, have your life, have a little bit of like, flexibility, but be in person, because there's nothing like eyeball to eyeball in a meeting, or like you said, like brainstorming. You can't do that on Zoom or Teams or what. You just can't. It's not the same. And this is I heard this from a client recently. She's like, okay, I have meetings and I'm in the conference room and I'm by myself because everyone else is like dialed in. And I just want to like get to people's office and be like, can you please like walk like the 10 feet over this way? So, I mean, maybe there will be a trend where like, there won't be the remote option, or only for people that I don't know, like, but it is like, we're still trying to find that settling point. And I hope we get there, because I can see like how like some businesses are swinging too far in one way. Some businesses probably are swinging too far in the other way. And I'm like, can't we just get like Goldilocks, like just get to the middle? Like that would be kind of lovely.
Somewhere in the middle. At the same time, though, like being remote has allowed us to attract talent we may not have been able to get before, right? So it's that balance, but it's hard. We'll figure it out. I mean, I think we're all evolving and learning as things go on. And I even see like there's like occasionally my team will tell me, yeah, we all got together last week, and brainstorm on this. I'm like, oh, okay, so they're doing it on their own too. But I think we'll evolve towards it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So, okay, so let's, I like, like this is where I want women, everybody listen and take some notes, right? Because we've talked a lot about the masculine and the feminine today. And I wanted to see, do you have any counsel on like when we may want to flex more masculine versus feminine? So everyone get the pens ready, or listen again to this section. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think I don't know if this is pen worthy, but I'll do my best. I think a lot of it is knowing your audience. There are times where if you're going to be going toe to toe with someone, or in a meeting with a client, where, again, I always tell people, you never want to lose who you are, right? So there's always a core of who you are as a person, and that's what you need to bring to every meeting. But you may want to adjust it. If you're with someone who's completely serious, very aggressive, wants to just get direct to the point, that is what you need to mirror. If you're with someone who seems a little bit more open to just sort of having the dialogue beforehand, again, you could probably adjust yourself as well. I think it's really critical to know who your audience is. Again, having the ability to be all the things that we spoke about showing up your whole self and being compassionate, all that is important. That's your core. Don't ever lose that. But you may need to adjust how and how you approach a situation, or a particular person, just based upon who they are. And I'm not just talking titles, right? That's super important as well. But what will get you the win with them, but you're still true to yourself, but you're also matching the energy matching the focus, matching the intent of who your audience is. One of the best classes I took years ago was exactly that, was like how to mirror your conversation style, your motivation style based upon your audience. And I think that's critical. You need to know who you're talking to, what's going to motivate them, and focus in on it that way. Because a very compassionate or empathetic approach is not going to work with everybody. But at the same point, you don't want to sell your values out either.
That is really good. So yes, that was pen worthy. Everybody write that down. What I will say is, so that also boils down to a topic. So, if you're looking for, well, what is that the study of? So it's like emotional intelligence. So they call it EQ. So like really understanding, like what we're all animals, really, if you think about it. So like, are you leaning in, like the tone of voice, like what is the eye contact looking like? Like really start studying people around you so that you can understand how your energy should be, more intense or a little less or a little more masculine or a little bit more feminine, right? So like that you can build those bridges in those relationships. Here's the good news, and I will use myself as an example. You're a more natural people person, Patty, and you would be like probably like quizzically like going, are you serious, Jen? But I'm not at work as much. So I'm a person that comes in, I'm like, let's just get the job done. Let's go, let's go, let's go. So I can get like too laser focused. And so I've had to train myself to like say, you know what? Walking around, managing by walking around, leading by walking around, going from desk to desk, and like really saying, how was your weekend? How was your weekend? What's going on? What's going on? I've had to train myself to do that because I could easily just go in my cave of my office and just go and just like plow
Yeah.
in, right? And so the reason I'm sharing that is because it can be learned. And maybe it's more natural to you where you're more of a people person. I'm more of an ambivert, which I've mentioned on the show before, but that I can flex extroverted and flex more towards people, but I'm more of an introvert. So it takes more energy than probably for you, Patty, but I've learned it. So the good news is, everybody, you can learn this skill. You can learn it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that story too, because it's true. Like I always say you don't have to be an extrovert to do exactly what you've just described. And I have plenty of introverts on my team, plenty of them. But again, that I go back to that basic, what is the foundation of a good leader, a good coworker, that honest, intellectual, value driven. Then the other pieces can come. You can nurture those for sure.
Totally. Absolutely. So, okay. So you mentioned at the top of our conversation, being a learner, right? So, are there any like books or resources, either on the masculine, feminine, or in general, like on leadership, that have really made a mark on you, or that you would recommend to women that are looking to lead?
This is where I'll make my confession. I am not a big business person, a business
It's
book reader.
fine.
But where I would say where I've leaned in is in people who are. So I have a woman at work she's wonderful, and she's really leaned into sort of the learning through all the things that we just discussed. And she'll say, Patty, you need to listen to this podcast. Patty, you'll need to listen to this podcast.
That's great.
So for me, again, it's what do I get from other people who bring it to me, as opposed to me seeking it out. So what I would say to anyone who's asking that question, if you're like me and you're not always one who's, reading the different book, I mean, lots of articles, but not every book is, when someone makes a suggestion, say yes and listen to it, because it's probably really good. So
That's
that
good.
would be my advice.
No, and I appreciate your honesty, because I mean, you're leading a team of 200 people. Is it 200, right? That's what you said
Somewhere
around.
around there.
That's a
Yes.
lot. Like that's like
Mhm.
that's like a small town, and
Mhm.
that's a small town, and so that's a lot of responsibility. So I appreciate that honesty, that you at least you key in, again, going back to that emotional intelligence. You're like, you know what, I probably should check into that, and you make the time
Yeah.
to actually learn, and you probably integrate what you're learning into leadership from there, right?
Mhm.
One of mine, so we're a little different. I'm in Gallup strengths, I have one of my strengths is learner. So I'm one of those like geeks, I'm one of those business book geeks, right? So I'm like always learning and listening to
Mhm.
apply to this podcast or whatever. But so, let's stay connected. So like I can like make references, and like you can take them, and we can kind of share back and forth with one another.
Would love it. Would love it.
It'd be
That
so
would be great.
fun. It'd
It
be
would
so
be
fun.
fun.
It would be fun. So, okay, so I have to ask, just because burnout is something I've experienced, and I don't want women to burn out in any way, shape, or form. So when I hear 200 people, I kind of get a little, like, my throat kind of closes and I kind of freak out, like, about leading that big of a team. I'm about to actually step in leading a larger team. So this is selfish for me. How do you, this is not like a really, this is not a, I don't like the word work-life balance. I don't think that's
Mhm.
real at all.
Mm-mm.
But
Mm-mm.
how do you kind of navigate? Let's use the word navigate it all. How do you navigate leading a team, having three children, and, because I'm sure women are listening and also wondering about that.
Yeah, and that's a great question because I also agree with you. There is no thing as work-life balance. And I also think for you, and you may feel the same way, is I actually get a lot of energy from work. I really enjoy what I do, but there are points in time where you do need a break. Now, having a really good spouse helps, someone who helps around the house, who helps, someone to be a sounding board, that's really incredible. And I'm very lucky to have that. What I would say though is equally important is you need to carve out that time for yourself, no matter what. And I know how hard it is. For me, it's taking walks in the morning. And it
Hmm.
sounds really simple and it doesn't sound like it's, this big rocket science thing, but carving out that hour. And sometimes I have to do it, honestly, Jen, as early as 6 in the morning because my calls may be starting at 7 or 8, but not
Hmm.
making any excuses and making that a priority. That hour that I have where I'm, either listening to a podcast, or I'm listening to music, or I'm just simply thinking, that's what recharges my batteries. When I don't do that, I see a shift and a change in how I'll always have time for everyone, but then I'll start getting like a little like antsy at the end of the day. And I'm just not really a nice person to be around because I just haven't had a single second to myself. So finding that hour or even just a half an hour to sit outside in between meetings when the sun is beating down. For me, it's those simple things that really
Hmm.
help. And I always encourage everyone on my team, like being on Zoom and Teams all day and staring at yourself in the corner of the screen, even though you don't try to, it can be exhausting. Take a call and go for a walk while you take it on the mobile. Do whatever it is you can to find those moments. That to me is the balance. And when I don't do that, if I don't make that a priority, I'm not good at what I do. So I encourage everyone on my team to do that. I encourage my friends to do that. And I try to make that as much of a priority as I can. Again, for me, it's that simple, that hour in the morning, that hour and a half where I am walking and it's just my time. Or like I said, just taking a moment to recharge the batteries. If you do not do that, you cannot be your best self.
Totally agree. I do the same thing. If we were in the same neighborhood, I'd be like, hey, hey, we'd be walking by each other.
Go. Let's go. Let's do
Exactly. Let's
it.
go. Okay, so this might be adjacent to what you just said, but I need to ask. So, what are 1 to 2 ways that you believe women can be braver at work today?
Okay, so one of them I said to earlier about the podcast, but it goes to everything in life. Everything. Say yes. I can't tell you how many times that I've been given opportunities where I could have easily have talked myself out of it. I'm not qualified. Why would they have picked me? There's so many smart people in the room. You know, every one of those self doubts. Say yes. You're tapped for a reason, right?
Hmm.
Say yes. Now, again, there's always a balance. There was a time where I took a step back when I was raising my kids. I still worked, but I could not say yes as often. Or if the opportunity doesn't fit with what you think is something that you would enjoy. I mean, but I would say yes. And every time I say yes, afterwards I have that, oh shoot, how am I going to do this? But you know what? Saying yes is the best advice that I can give you. The other thing too, in terms of being braver, is I find, again, we talked a little bit, I do get my energy from people, but I've built my bravery or feeling brave by the network of people that surround me. And I'm not just talking about the people that I work with. I think it's really important to find your group, whether it be someone who maybe you worked with 10 years ago, who knew you at that point in time, who you stay connected with, maybe it's someone recent. And these don't have to be peers, these don't have to be mentors, it's just who your group is. And anytime where I do have to make a decision or I am taking on something that feels outside of my comfort zone, I'll call one of them up and say, what do you think? What do you think? And then that group, the friends, and I don't want to call network because it's more than a network in many cases. We may not talk to each other for a year, but when we do, it's that connection's pretty deep. Find and nurture those relationships. May not be as broad as mine is, maybe it's just two or three, but find and nurture. You will find your bravery, your voice, your ability to believe in yourself. Sometimes it's just in a simple conversation with someone who knows you well and knows you what you're capable of, who believes in you and who wants to see you succeed. So say yes, and then call up somebody right away and say, guess what I said yes to?
That's so awesome. You can't say yes and be like, oh boy, what did I just commit to? And you know what? I will say, I've talked to a lot of women about this where they'll say, oh, I don't have time for friends, or I don't have time for these colleagues. Schedule it. It sounds perfunctory,
Yeah.
but schedule it, especially if you're really in a busy season of your life. I schedule time to talk to friends, which sounds like, wow, that's pretty like, wow. But no, but it works. It works.
It
So
does.
there's nothing wrong with that to say, hey, can we talk on Saturday at 2 p.m. while I'm, walking the dog or
Yep.
with the kids or whatever. It makes a world of difference. So invest that time in yourself.
Absolutely. It certainly does.
So good. So how can women connect with you online, Patty?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. So you'll find me under Patty Altman. I answer all my direct messages, try and interact with people as much as I can, but definitely feel free to reach out to me there. And I'd love to hear from you, from anyone who's would be interested to talk and to foster a networking relationship.
So good. Thank you so much for being here today, for being a wonderful leader in your space, and just for being such a fun guest. It's been wonderful to get to know you.
You as well, Jen. I really appreciate this. It was an honor to be here today. So thank you.
Well, that's a wrap on my discussion with Patty today. I hope you found our conversation valuable, fun, and inspiring. Here are a few questions to consider until next time. What are your top masculine traits? How can you leverage them to your advantage? What are your feminine traits? Think about driving a stick shift if you've ever had the opportunity to drive one. How can you blend your masculine and feminine traits to be an impactful leader? How do you shift between masculine and feminine to drive impact home as you lead your teams? As a reminder, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The show is also available on any other podcast platform you enjoy. Until next time, show up, leverage the feminine and the masculine, and be brave.